The next group of slides is going to go through the project inspector duties as defined in Admin Code section 4-342. I'll start off by saying that the PI is supervised by the design professional, or architect engineer. The PI could also be subject to supervision by DSA in some cases as well. The PI duties are as follows. This is going to carry over into multiple slides, but we'll start off with number one, is to provide continuous inspections. So the PI must have personal knowledge. If you recall, we defined that in one of the previous sections. Must have personal knowledge in all stages of construction progress. That all requirements of all the approved construction documents, so the plans, specs, CCDs, addenda, are being completely executed. Continuous inspection means complete inspection of every part of work. For work that can only be inspected during placement, such as when concrete's being placed or masonry, grouting, and so on, that's going to require the project inspector to be there when it's happening so that they can inspect it. But there's other work that can be completely inspected after installation. So in those cases, the work can happen and then the PI can inspect it later on after the work is done. So continuing with the continuous inspections, the project inspector, regardless of the type of work being done, must personally inspect every part of the work, whether it happens as the work's happening or afterwards. When possible, the PI still has to inspect every part of the work. The PI shall not take on any duties that would prevent continuous inspection from being able to happen. So if you can imagine that the PI is overloaded with work or scheduling conflicts that would prevent them from being there to do the inspection, then that would be a problem. DSA may require verification from the PI of time spent at the construction site during all phases of the work, just to ensure that the continuous inspection is happening. The project inspector can always obtain personal knowledge of construction work, whether it's on-site or off-site, if it's performed under the inspection of a special inspector or an assistant inspector. So that's important to note. There are going to be cases where a single project inspector just physically can't do all the work if it's a really big project. So that's when you would rely on a special inspector and a assistant inspector to help with that process. But the project inspector definitely needs to be managing that and supervising that work that occurs. The project inspector can again obtain personal knowledge of the materials used to conform to the DSA-approved documents by reviewing and verifying test reports that are performed by a DSA-accepted testing facility, or material certifications that get shipped with the materials or other means specified in the DSA-approved documents and reference codes and standards. So material certs are on rebar and steel. Those, of course, would be used to verify material conformance. The project inspector also needs to verify that the special inspectors have valid certifications for the work being inspected. A lot of times the labs will manage that and oversee it if the special inspector is part of their group, but we still want the project inspectors to be on top of that as well. The project inspector is responsible for monitoring the work of all special inspectors and labs to ensure that the T&I program, the test and inspection from the DSA 103, is being done satisfactorily. And just to wrap up the continuous inspections, the project inspector again is responsible for supervising the work of all assistant inspectors, and then exercising reasonable diligence to attain the facts is required by the project inspector. This slide outlines the project inspector's relations with the design professional, architect, engineer. So any project inspector uncertainties and comprehension, or if there's any confusion or inconsistencies with the approved construction documents, we expect the project inspector to coordinate that and report it promptly to the design professional and rely on them for interpretation and further instruction. In no case will the design professional's instructions be construed to cause construction work that's not in conformity with the DSA-approved documents to allow to continue. So again, if there is something that's being done, structural, fire, life safety, or access that is deviating from the DSA-approved documents, that would need to be addressed and submitted to DSA for review. Just want to talk a little bit about the chain of command for Project Inspector and how to deal with uncertainties that you come across. If there's something that's confusing or you feel like may not be right on the plans, the first step is always going to be to reach out to the design professional or the architect or engineer for direction and clarification. There may very well be an agreement that was made between the design professional and DSA with an approved alternate means and methods that is beyond what would normally be handled in the code. So they may be able to clarify that and resolve it that way. Just want to make it clear that the project inspector should not be issuing a deviation notice for code concerns that are not shown on the DSA approved documents. So if you come across something that is approved on the set of plans, but you're based on your knowledge of the building code, you feel like it doesn't conform with or comply with the building code, go ahead and bring that up to the DSA field engineer and also to the design professional, but don't issue a deviation notice for it. Deviations are really only for construction issues that are shown on the DSA approved documents. So if there's something on the DSA approved documents and they're building it per the documents, that's not a reason to issue a deviation if you feel like it doesn't satisfy building code. So go ahead and reach out to the design professional or the field engineer. Also, that second sub-bullet, the PI cannot compel CCD submission. So we don't want project inspectors demanding or requesting CCDs for something that they feel like doesn't meet current code. But go ahead and reach out to the design professional in DSA, and we'll certainly work with, listen to what your concerns are on that. And it's very, very likely that we'll go ahead and say that a CCD needs to be submitted, and we can, the DSA field engineer can do that by a field trip note or alternative directive. And if a CCD is deemed required, just make sure that it's reviewed and approved by DSA before the work actually starts, before they commence with the relevant construction on that. In the next few slides, we're going to go through a lot of the items that are that need to be maintained in the project inspector's job file. So we expect the project inspector to maintain this job file at all times, and it needs to include all of the following items. So of course, the DSA approved plans and specs, and that would include all the addenda, revisions, and CCDs and deferred submittals. Anything that's approved by DSA needs to be maintained. And any applicable parts of the California Code of Regulations, Title 24, so the admin code, the CVC, noted in the plans and specs would need to be included in the job file. And then of course the T&I list, the form DSA 103 needs to be printed, and that's done on an 8.5 by 11. That needs to be maintained as well. Project inspection card, so all the 152 form, and any contractor submittals, so shop drawings, RFI submittals, anything that is affecting inspection and the project construction activities. The job file also needs to include a detailed log that documents all significant construction related communication with the project team members. So any directions or correspondence that has significant aspects needs to be maintained. So some examples of that would be interpretations or clarifications or directions from design professionals. Any issues identified by DSA representatives, the field engineer, or directors from the school district, or start notices from the contractor. That's the sort of the things that we would expect to see to be included. Also, any deviation notices that would be done on the form DSA 154 need to be kept in the log, and they need to reference which applicable details and spec sections that are related to the non-conforming materials that led to the deviation, including addenda, revisions, CCDs, deferred submittals. The deviation notices it needs to describe all the corrective actions that are taken, whether it's performed in accordance with the DSA-approved documents or not. And then we'd also want to see what is the current status of each of the deviations, and how did the deviations get resolved. Also, the job file needs to maintain a record of all of the structural concrete placing operations. We want to make sure that the time and date of the concrete placement and any time the forms are removed for each portion of the structure. Or welding operations, including the welder's identification marks, any list of defective welds, manner of correction of the defects, or another example would be pile driving operations, including the penetration for the last 10 blows for each pile. There also needs to be evidence of continuous inspection. So for example, the daily project inspection forms, special inspection and test reports, structural materials and fire life safety testing reports, including any non-structural test reports such as water sanitation, BFP testing, gas and potable water pressure test, HVAC balancing, and that sort of thing. Also special inspection reports, including non-structural special inspection reports like elevator inspection, fire stopping inspection. Those sort of things would need to be kept in the job file in this log. And then of course semi-monthly reports on the form 155. So that would be done in the first of the month and then the middle of the month as well. The job file also needs to keep a copy of all the verified reports from all persons required to file verified reports, and we covered that in previous slides. Also a copy of all the field trip notes from the DSA field engineer. That would be done on the form DSA 135, and that usually gets done about once a month depending on the size of the project. And any other applicable documents required to provide a complete record of construction. The job file needs to be kept on the job site until project completion. It needs to be available and accessible to DSA personnel during site visits so that we can look at it and make sure we're in the loop on everything that's happening. And it needs to be made available to DSA upon request. So if a field engineer comes out to the site and they ask to see it, it needs to be readily available and so that the field engineer can view it. And then it needs to become a part of the permanent school district records. This is so that if that building's there are any alterations or rehabilitations done on the future and we need to access those records, that's why the school district needs to keep that available. The only exception to this is any building codes and reference standards that are required. Those would be your own personal copies, so that wouldn't need to be part of the permanent school records. Semi-monthly reports. The project inspector, this is what a project inspector uses to keep the design professional and DSA informed in the loop for what's going on with construction as it's progressing. So again, this is a semi-monthly report. It's usually done on the 1st and the 16th of each month. It's prepared on the form DSA 155 as shown here below. And you can see this will be available in the resources tab, and it's also available on the website. Okay, moving on, notifications to DSA, triggers for the project inspector to notify DSA. So again, anytime construction work begins or is restarted if it was previously suspended, at least 48 hours in advance of anticipated completion of foundation trenches are ready for footing form. So if there's something that the field engineer may want to come out and take a look at, we need to have advance notice so that we can plan accordingly to do that. At least 48 hours in advance of first placement of foundation concrete and first grout placement for masonry construction when requested by DSA. And 24 hours in advance of any subsequent and significant concrete placement or grout placement for for masonry construction. So again, if it's something that's going to be covered up and can't be looked at after it's done, like placing concrete, and we wouldn't be able to know what rebar's in there, and if it was built properly, then we need to be notified in advance in case we need to make a trip out to the site to view those items. And then also when all work on the project is suspended for more than a month. And again, notifications are made using the form DSA 151 as shown in the top right of the screen. That's the top of the form. And then it's also provided in one of the resources tabs. Item 6 for deviations. This is what the project would use to issue in writing to alert the contractor of any DSA deviations from the DSA-approved construction documents, and that's if they're not immediately corrected when brought to the contractor's attention. So it's important to note that you should always coordinate with the contractor to let them know of something that you feel is a deviation, and they may be in the process of still fixing it. I think it's you should have to use your judgment to know whenever the contractor is in the process or going to be fixing something versus if they're moving on to other work and starting to cover things up, and it's unlikely that they're going to go back and fix it. So those would be the cases when you would need to issue a deviation to document it and make sure that it keep the design professional and DSA in the loop. So copies of such notice need to be sent immediately to the design professional and to DSA, and the deviation notices are prepared on the form 154 as shown here in the top right of the screen. And again, that's going to be provided in the resources tab in the associated forms. And then any resolutions of the deviations are also going to be sent to the same parties, and those will be sent using the same 154 form to show how the deviation has been resolved. Item 7, verified reports. We've already talked about this, but the project inspector should be submitting the verified reports directly to DSA. That would be done using the form 152 for the interim verified report, and then the 6 PI for the final verified report. Performance of duties in item 8, the project inspector needs to perform all duties and render all services with honesty. So if any PI fails to carry out their duties in an ethical manner or engages in illegal activities, they may be subject to disciplinary action by DSA. We'll talk a little bit about the different steps for that. And then the form DSA 119, this is how this is the form that DSA uses to document performance on by the project inspector on a job. So PI performance review, it's completed each visit, has specific check boxes. It's very factually based. There's no opinion or subjectivity that goes into it. This is going to get posted in DSA box, so that will be available for others to see. And then the form DSA 180 is also, it's basically a collection and a summary of all the DSA 119 for a project. So if you do DSA field engineer does this every time they go out to each site visit, and they do 10 site visits, then they would theoretically fill out 10 119 forms, and then those all get combined into a single DSA 180, and it gives a picture of how the project inspector performed for that entire project. So again, the 180 is available for public viewing, and here's a snippet of each of those forms, and then you can refer to the resources tab as part of this training for a copy. Admin Code Section 4-342C outlines some of the violations as part of the project inspector duties. So for instance, if the project inspector fails to notify the contractor of any non-compliant work, or if they fail to report it immediately in writing to the design professional, the school district, or DSA, that would constitute a violation, and it would be a cause for DSA to take disciplinary action. DSA can also take disciplinary action for the following conditions in the lower two sub-bullets. If the project inspector has failed to fulfill any of the relevant requirements of the California Code of Regulations Title 24, or if the project inspector has been convicted of a crime that's substantially related to their qualifications, functions, or duties in a manner consistent with public health, safety, or welfare. This slide outlines some of the disciplinary actions that DSA can take to address some of the PI duties mentioned on the previous slide. We'll start by going down the list. As you can see, as we go down the list, it gets more serious for the disciplinary actions. Starting off, we could require the project inspector to have a meeting with DSA in the regional office for some counseling. Or it could require the project inspector to attend training classes, as it gets a little bit more serious, withdrawal of the project inspector approval for that project, or downgrading the project inspector certification class. So for instance, going from a class 1 to a class 2. And then if it's serious enough, it may lead to either suspension or withdrawal of the project inspector certification. I should point out, even though there's a kind of an increasing list of severity with these, DSA can make the determination to jump all the way down to the bottom and withdrawal of project inspector certification if it's serious enough.